Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything.
Welcome, engagers, to another episode of the Professor Game Podcast. And today we have Dov with us. But before we kick off, Dov, are you prepared to engage?
As I'll ever be.
Let's do this, because today we have with us Dov, who is a Tao-inspired, agile, systemic, and exec coach living in the heart of Paris with a woman and a dog. He's an avid speaker and facilitator and has a love-hate relationship with serious games. Interesting. He's also the creator of the Meeting Spicer, a tool to hack meeting culture that he believes can change the world. So, Dov, is there anything that we're missing from that intro? Dov Tsal, by the way, is the full name.
Yes. No, there's nothing that we're missing that I know of.
We haven't found out about it yet. Well, actually, we were mentioning that you are also a fellow podcaster you mentioned the Agile Tao or something like that, right?
So I'm a fellow podcaster, and I have a podcast that is a little bit strange because it tries to connect the mind of business with the ancient mind of the Book of Tao, with ancient wisdom that is 2,500 years old. Some say was here always. Interesting conversations. But here we're talking about games, right? So let's talk about games.
So that is great, Dov. And we always like to get to know our guests a little bit more. Now we know that you have a podcast as well that has all these ancient practices incorporated into, agility and other things in current life. So if we got into a day of your life or to follow you around for a day or for a week, what would that look like? What would that feel like? How do we, know that it's Dov's life that we're looking at?
Voilà. So from the inside, I don't think there's a typical game. I sit near my computer with the camera on, talk to people, write articles, walk the dog when I'm at home. And mainly I'm trying to find connections. I'm trying to discover people who I don't know, see where I can help and where I can connect people and discover new ideas. Today, because of all the COVID thing, there's tons of tools and advances in this virtual space, which I'm fascinated by. So that's how my day looks like. And on the weekend, I rest.
Very important to rest on weekends as well. So, Dov, we want to dive right in, and we would like to know of a story of what we like to call a fail moment or a first attempt in learning. Do you have some sort of favorite failure? And I know you have these mixed feelings about failure. It's never final or fatal, which is something that we say as well on the podcast. But one of those times you were going in one direction, things went maybe in the opposite direction. And of course, what did you learn from that? How did you get out of it? We want to be there in that moment with you and learn those lessons as well.
Yeah, so first, perhaps about my objection, I tend to improvise. So there's not a lot of big failures because there's not a lot of big upfront commitment to some process that I'm going to follow. The last one was an interesting one. I facilitated a silent session. So it's a session of 90 minutes for a conference where people join and they don't talk. And it's a great idea that I got from two friends of mine that I met in Play 14, which I'm sure you heard of,
yes.
Called Ricardo and Angela. And so we planned it a lot. We planned what will be the process and where can people get stuck and all of that. And we came to the event and there were two guests. So we were three facilitators with two guests. And it was a wonderful experience. And that's why I'm saying the feeling of failure takes 1 minute. And then you just take it as what it is now and roll with it. So it was really a great experience. And because of that experience, one of the participants, who was also still is a friend of mine, one of the facilitators also of the Paris Agile Games meetup last week created a session that's dedicated to silent activities. So you never know when the failure becomes a success, right?
Interesting. And what did, because of course you had all these things planned, all these ways that you were going to go, expecting, I don't know how many, maybe 5, maybe 10, maybe 40 people. I don't know. How did you, sort of immediately pivot? Like, what went through your minds, and how did you maybe communicate, which was also part of the difficulties because it was a silent session?
So one of the things that I love to do is to have everything transparent. So like there's no way to, we tell all the participants, including the facilitators, let's change the rules, and now let's do this, and now let's do that. And in fact, now that I think about it, I tend to do a lot of activities. I speak or I do workshops where I prepare a lot, and I prepare enough so that I can leave everything that I prepare aside and just roll with it. So it's the preparation itself that allows to deviate if something goes wrong, or just if you see that it doesn't really fit the situation.
Of course, that's a big part of the preparation, is being prepared for things that change. But since you know your topic or whatever it is that you're doing pretty well, you're able to pivot and make those changes for sure. So can you tell us also of another story? Of course, this one does not have to do necessarily with failure, or it might be included, however you want to aim it. But this one is actually of success, something that, you were doing something and it went the right way, one of those things that you might even call one of your proud moments, one of those things, you might even want to brag during this question. We want to be there in that story and maybe have one or two elements of what you would say are part of the success factors, so to speak.
Okay, so let me brag a bit. I was working in a big company in Thailand, and we had an event that was really hard to produce, which is a gathering of all the stakeholders to plan for a yearly, what will the department produce during the following year. And there's something like 5 or 6 stakeholders, important people, don't like to play, don't have much time. And the product owner, who was a bit stressed, asked my help in the facilitation of this. And what we did is we sort of twisted a game that is known in the Agile community, which is buy a feature. So we said, let's ask everyone to write down what do they want to fill the year with. And we had the product owner quickly guesstimate how much effort it will take. But then we gave everyone an amount of coins. And the coins is how much effort is the thing that they want to produce. And we played by a feature. So now every iteration we planned for the next 2 months. And people had to discuss with each other and convince each other whether they pay the full amount for what they want or they share it with another department. And also we asked the manager of everyone before, are the people who are more important than other? And to these people, we gave more money. And every time when we had exactly the right amount of coins or budget, the iteration was closed. And at the end, after 2 hours, we had 1 hour planning with no arguing. And one person who before the activity told me that she hates games, she told me it was a wonderful idea. It was a wonderful workshop, wonderful results, and she still hates games.
So you couldn't change her mind too much about that, but he or she still enjoyed that activity and went through and got the results that were expected. And this is an interesting feedback because we do get tons of people, say, oh, I don't like games. I hate games. Why? I mean, this is a serious place. Why would you, even consider talking or using games? They're fun. Like, what are you doing? This doesn't make sense. And then, there's many ways people approach it. Some are sort of hard selling on, this is what I do. This is the way. These are the results. Some other people just go around and say, well, let's see this as an activity. Let's see this as a workshop, whatever that you want to call it, not as a game. And they get it through. And sometimes, it just doesn't go through. And it happens as well because some people are so sort of biased towards or against games that they just want to run away from that. But that sounds like an interesting one. even after, having success, this person was still saying, I hate games.
But it doesn't matter, right? Like the goal is not to gamify the world. The goal
not.
is to make things happen. I have another short story if you want.
Sure.
I just remembered. So I was working with an agile department, and I've sent them and also the CEO, which works closely with them, a book which is called Doing It by Ralph van Roosmalen. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. And the first paragraph in his book is that he carries always a die, right? Two dice, one die in his pocket for whenever he needs to make a decision. So the CEO wrote to me and he said, I didn't have time to read the book, but I read the first paragraph, really interesting, the idea of a dice. And I'm going to buy a big fluffy die and put it in the office. So I knocked on his door 2 days later and I said, until you have the time to buy this huge die, here's a small one, just as a gift, and you can give it back to me when you buy your big one. And then a week later I asked him, did you use the die? And he said, in fact, yes, because I had someone who I had to have a tough conversation with. So I called him into the office and I rolled the dice and I said, if the die falls on 1 to 6, then I have to have a hard conversation with you. But if it falls on 7 and on, then no. And it was so funny, to see how you can inject this game mind, someone to think about a gamified way to do hard stuff and to affect this high in the organization was a very proud moment of my life.
Sounds a very interesting one. You sort of inserted, as you were saying, a playful attitude for sure. Like, let's see what happened. What did the die say? And depending on that, you made some other decisions, and you gave some, so you gave luck a chance in that case. And you were mentioning, like, from your bio, we were reading that you have a sort of a love-hate relationship with serious games. What do you mean by that? I don't know. How does that look? Like, how would you describe that love-hate relationship?
In fact, I don't like games where I feel that whoever animates it is smarter than the players. Like, I don't like games that are designed to bring to a specific learning. I love games that let emergence in, where you have no clue what will happen, right? So you have very wide guardrails, but inside the guardrails, you're part of the players. You're not in a place that is above them as much as possible, of course.
And how do you avoid having that? Like, what would that, maybe if you were going to create some solution through a game or a gamified strategy, and you wanted to make sure that happens, like, how would that process look like? How would you do it? How would you achieve it?
So first of all, as I said, the goal is not to create a game. The goal is to create some learning activity.
Yeah.
And if it happens to be a game, why not? So even, in what I described before, right, where this buy a feature workshop, I have no clue what will happen. I'm not trying to make them just learn. I'm trying to make them go through the process and to have some real value at the end. So if I'm doing a game which is just for the fun of it, then the learning that needs to emerge will emerge.
Gotcha.
So I guess I'm trying to say I don't like the didactic part of games.
Okay. Gotcha. The place where you're kind of being told what to do is what I'm guessing you're getting at, right?
Either this or a place where there is one exception, but I won't go into it. Where you know more than your audience. When you are like a puppet master, when everyone is looking in the left corner, and in fact the solution is in the right one.
Okay, so the game master situation is what you probably don't enjoy too much. Gotcha.
Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification.
And so we've been talking about that process, that way of achieving, not being that puppet master, as you were mentioning. Is there some sort of best practice if we were talking about, using games for whatever situation or facilitation, etc.? What would you say is maybe a best practice that people could say, well, if you do this or if you consider this, you'll probably have a better product, a better game result in the end?
Yeah, so as you already understood, it's a bit of the other way around. So for me, there's no real process. I try to meditate and see that I understand the problem as much as I can, to see the problem in the process, the problem in the mindset of the people, the problem in the place where we do it, the time constraint. And then the activity just comes, right? Because I have a lot of experience in a lot of different workshops, something will emerge. And I would say like some guidelines. One, when you do a game, make it explicit and people have to opt in. So don't force people into a game. And
so making it voluntary, which is fundamental. Games are voluntary, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a problem because in a big group, you have to also listen to the common consent, right? Not only to the loud voices that say yes, and be ready to change the process if someone really resists. And that's why I'm saying something that is more respectful, something that where people don't feel like they're, a lot of times, especially people who see themselves as more important, they don't like to be what they call treated like kids. And game is being treated like kids. Now we're going to play a game. These are the rules, have some dice, have some cards. It raises resistance, especially in the people who need it the most. So be ready to dilute a little bit the gamefulness in order to include them.
Gotcha. Very, very interesting concept and very interesting way of seeing these things. And after hearing these questions, I know you heard a couple of interviews as well before coming into this one. Is there somebody that piques your curiosity that you say, I would really like to listen to this or that person answering these questions on Professor Game?
Sure, for sure. One person who comes to mind, and her name is Lily Higgins.
Lily Higgins.
Yes. And I even looked in the site and you didn't host her yet.
Cool.
I prepared my home. She designs urban games. So I'll give you an example of a very simple one, which is follow colors. So you go to the street and now you focus on the color pink. Wherever you see pink, that's where you turn. And you go from pink to pink. Another game that she just published and it really I love games like this, is a game that has two participants. One receives a list of, from what I understand, a list of random instructions, and he follows the other one by phone. So he's behind there's a player and there's someone who leads him or her. And then he can say, find a place to hide. Why did you choose this place? Or what do you think that these two people are talking about? And they walk in a safe distance. I guess it was created during COVID times when you had to keep a safe distance. And what I like about it is that it's totally emergent. And again, there's no, what I just talked before, there's no role of a game master who knows more than the other.
Yeah, it's sort of the game. And I saw this very recently. I hadn't ever played role-playing games before, where you typically have the game master in that sense, who is sort of guiding people through. In this case, this game was specifically designed. We still it was our first experience for several of us in the group, but there was a possibility of playing that game without a game master. So that was something I found very, very interesting, because you could sort of build up the story without the game master. So the way the instructions were created, it was such that this could happen. And I found that very, very interesting. Like, the way to design that is way, I'm sure, way more difficult than having a regular one where you can have, people who are guiding you through and making their story. This one, it was, the story goes emerging from the players who are there within the certain restrictions and constraints of the game itself, of course. But I found that deeply, interesting, like very, very different as well.
I'm not sure that it's more difficult. I think it's a matter of personality types.
No, I mean for the designer of the game, not
Yeah,
of
I'm talking about the
player.
designer. Like for me,
Okay.
when I design a game that is open, I trust the group to take ownership of the creation of the game. So if the rules are not well specified, if there are holes, it's an opportunity for the people who play to let things happen, to make up their own rules to gap this bridge.
Interesting. I hadn't seen it that way, but that does make sense for sure. And in that same sense of recommendations, you've given us, a best practice, so to speak, a possible person who is a guest in Professor Game. Is there a book maybe that you would recommend our engagers?
For sure. There is one book, which is a book that sort of it changed the course of my life in recent years, which is called the Agile Tao, which is a fascinating refactoring of the Book of Tao into the language of business agility. And it's intended to inspire leaders, to inspire people who have some say in the emergence of their companies, of the companies they work in. And it's just a book that I read over and over. And as I said, I have a podcast about it.
So, Dov, we've been talking about all these things, all these recommendations that you've had, which have been fantastic. Is there something that you would say, is your sweet spot, your superpower when talking about, all these things of agility, Tao, the games as well involved? Is there, or maybe something that you're doing to demonstrate that superpower that you got? That thing you do better, at least than most other people.
Yeah. So my superpower is improvisation. My superpower is the ability to come unprepared and help things come out, I guess. So a lot of workshops that I do, the main thing is to be present. The main thing is to see what's going on with all of the people around you. Are there any confusions? How far are we? If we have a goal for this workshop, how far away are we from there? How much time there is? And to take this into the, I'd say, the unconscious part of the brain, and the activity will emerge.
Interesting. And is there an example of where you're doing this kind of things?
I think almost all of the time. Yeah, the story of the cube is a good example of that. Or I'll give you another example with the same person. I was in a meeting with all the board of directors of this place, and we had a lot of proposals. One of the proposals was, let's initiate something we call a no meeting Friday. So from this Friday on, there will be no meetings in the organizations on Friday. And he said, yeah, interesting. And my response was, so you mean that starting next week, there will be no meetings here, right? So the ability to jump on what happens and react to it made this no meeting Friday happen for, I think it survived for a year and a half after that.
Survived just a year and a half. Wow, that's an interesting one, and it's an interesting policy. I've heard it before as well. I have a colleague who the company they're working for has that policy. However, I don't know if this is what happened in your case, but there's no meeting Friday. That's the policy. Everybody knows it. But then you arrive to Friday and ta-da, there's a meeting in your calendar. How do you manage these things?
Yeah, so this is, I think, a big. The other thing that I created in that organization is the meeting Spicer, which is the activity that I created, which again emerged from this need. There's one thing is to eliminate meetings, but the main thing is how do you make your meetings better, right? So if someone books a meeting on Friday, there is probably a need. And by the way, in that no meeting Friday, I used to hang around the meeting floor because there was a floor dedicated to meeting rooms. And occasionally there were people there, only much less, and one-on-one and informal meetings. So, it's not a draconian law.
Interesting. I love that. And you mentioned meeting Spicer. Like, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So when I worked with HR at that place, one of our missions was to help this, the mindset of running from meeting to meeting with you know what horrible meetings are, right? I guess I don't think there's someone in the world who doesn't. And the higher you are in the hierarchy, the more your day looks like a huge puzzle of meetings that run back to back and don't give you any time to breathe.
Yeah, been
And
there.
So we tried to understand, and I think this is an interesting story about how a game is created, because someone had on the desk a page with 7 practices for good meetings. So we said, as an experiment, let's put it in meeting rooms. Only let's sit outside, and when people get out, ask them, did it help? And first iteration, no one noticed it. Second iteration, people noticed it but didn't read it, mainly because it was in English and it was not an English organization. Third one, they started reading, but it's too long. And we had a lot of iterations like this. And at some point, we put it on the desk and we decided to put only 1 or 2 advices, and it was not bad. Only after a week or 2, it stopped working. And it stopped working because when something is sitting on your desk for weeks, it becomes part of the scenery. You stop noticing it. So I said, what if this sign would change all the time? And in fact, this is what the Meeting Spicer is. So the Meeting Spicer is one small advice or one small thing to think of as a team that changes all the time. And the pretext is that we try to collect things that take half a minute to execute. And half a minute of your meeting at the beginning and then half a minute at the end is nothing. For a meeting that takes half an hour, to take 1 minute of your meeting to do something that might help you is really, it's an insignificant cost.
Yeah, it's a sufficiently small request or ask out of people so that it can be implemented. And it reminded me, there was a colleague that used to work with me at IE University. He used this sports metaphor, right? So when you are very, very high at the top of your game in sports, whether that's Olympics or football or whatever that looks like, right? So there gets a point where, having a 10% improvement is almost impossible, right? Like getting your physical level to 10% better, or if you're, competing with bicycles, getting 10% is a huge amount. What one thing can you do to get that 10%? It's probably impossible. So what can you do? You can improve a small percentage, a very small thing, 1% better in 10 or 20 different things. And there you will be able to improve your times or your whatever in that 10% that you were asking for before. So those small increments do make a huge difference. I believe in that very, very much, Dov. So thanks for that example. I loved it. And talking about these things, we get to a question that many guests find difficult, but you have a different relationship with, with games and serious games. Talking about games in general or whatever you want to go for, what would you say is your favorite game?
Okay, so besides the games of Lily, there are 2 games that I thought of. One is The Mind. So I don't know if you know The Mind, but for the listeners, The Mind is a game where people play in silence, where it is the goal is a cooperative goal, so there's no competition, and people get random cards with numbers. And the goal is to put the numbers that they have face up from the lowest to the highest without speaking or any other means of communication. So just by connecting to each other and trying to get this feel, to look at the other's face and see if they're ready to put a card or not. And it's magic. So I usually take this game when I travel. It's a great way to, when you meet new people to spend an evening together because you don't have to use words. There's no language barrier. And once you understand the rule of the game, it's just silent and very intense and connecting.
Very, very interesting. I think I had heard something or something similar. I can't remember if it had been something else as well. So thank you very much, Dov, for investing your time.
I have another one.
Oh, you have another one. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the other one, I discovered it 2 years ago, and it's less effective now in the pandemic, but perhaps it will start again. Who knows? It's called sneaky cards. So sneaky cards are cards that you buy, and they contain tasks for you in the real world. For example, take this card and put it in a pocket of pants in a clothing store. And if you found this card in the pants of a clothing store, you should put it in the pocket of pants in another one. Or invite someone for coffee and give them this card. Or write the name of a celebrity and give this card to the person who you think is closest to this celebrity. And if you got this card, again, no. So it's a wonderful game to, one, as I said before, hack your surroundings. So the border between playing and living becomes blurry. And
it's
the
part
other
of
one,
life
which
itself,
is ingenious here. What?
It's part of life itself.
Yeah. And the other ingenious part is that if you play well, you lose your cards and you have to buy another deck. So this is like a brilliant, a brilliant scheme.
Commercially very viable. Very, very interesting as well. So thank you very much, Dov, for all these insights, all these, examples, all the games that you mentioned, the books, everything that you've been sharing, your knowledge, your expertise on. So thank you very much for all that, for investing your time with the engagers. Before we let you go, is there, can you let us know where we can find more about you, maybe start a conversation as well, on social media or whatever? If there's any final words you want to leave us with, and then we'll say it's game over.
Yes. So the easiest one is LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Tsal in the world.
Gotcha. Good. So we'll put that on the show notes for sure. Thank you once again for investing this time, for being here with us. However, for now, and at least for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey, engagers. Thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast. And I'd like to know if you are listening through a podcasting app. If so, have you followed, have you rated this podcast? Please go ahead and do so. That way we can reach more engagers like you to achieve our mission of making learning amazing. And if you want the instructions, all you have to do is go to professorgame.com/iTunes. The letter iTunes, all one word. Before you go on to your next mission, remember to subscribe, to follow using that favorite podcast app so that you listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.